Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Roundtable Co-op's Indie Insights. I was lucky enough to speak with today's guest for a different outlet probably about 18 months ago, which seems like a long time ago, but in game dev terms, it's not really all that long. And I was so happy to be talking to Andrew West, CEO of Bungarra Studios, in the lead up to the release of their new surfing game, the Barton Lynch Pro Surfing. Andrew, thank you so much for jumping in today.
Thank you, Darren. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
I'm going to be referring to the other interview we did because I think we've got this little bit of history. May as well leverage that a bit there. But we were talking there about the history of Bungarra Studios, and I didn't realize you guys have been around pretty much since the early 2000s.
We have. We started in 1998. We started in it was my brother and myself and a programmer. We literally started out of his garage. Well, it was a refurbished garage. He was living in it, and we were sort of working out of this place. And we borrowed some money, I think, as we discussed, from an uncle, and then we basically pitched any publisher that would would listen to us or talk to us. We were building a surfing simulation back then, which is effectively the same game we're building now. So we've come full circle, really, and yeah, it's been a pretty rough ride. I won't kid you. We've had a few different publishers, as I think we discussed the first time around.
Yeah.
EA, Vivendi, Universal, XS Games in America, a small budget publisher there, and then in 2017 we released our first arcade surfing game on the PS3. I think we were probably one of the last titles to release on the PS3. Everyone had given up the ghost by then. But we crawled over broken glass. There were three of us at that point to get that game to market. And then in 2019, we started this project, which ironically is effectively the same project we started out with 20 odd years ago. So we've come full circle. An absolute mission, but anyway, we're here now.
Yeah, and it is amazing seeing the footage from the game as it's progressed over the years. I just before we do move on onto that though, I do want to have a bit of a chat about how the development's changed. Like the introduction of digital distribution has been
Yes.
a game changer for indie devs. So you're not like you still have to have the publisher, but it's a lot easier to get your games out there now. And like when you're talking about 98, that's like heyday of the Nintendo 64 sort of era of gaming.
Yeah.
And I like, can you walk us through some of the challenges you had trying to get a game out then?
Yeah. Happy to.
Yeah.
The the way it used to be for all of us as developers, it was very much hand to mouth. It was very much master servant. The freedoms that we have today just didn't exist really in the same sense back then, and that is because everything was disk based. So there was no digital anything. It was all disk based, and that we had the three. Well, Sega, I guess, to some extent as well, but mainly the three platforms that are still in existence today. So there was obviously Xbox, PlayStation 1, and N64, as you pointed out. The Dreamcast was still a thing, and so in order to get onto those platforms, it was via the publisher only. Effectively, there was none of this. You'd have to be pretty special, maybe someone like Rare, for on the Nintendo side, would get a look in a first party deal with a platform directly, but it was all through the publisher. And so the publisher would, very much like the music industry, I guess, in some respects, where the record company would pay the band, to record the album. The same thing with the developer. So we would be funded exclusively if you could get a deal with a publisher, and they would take the lion's share of the royalty, and they had the access to the platforms directly. We would never talk to the platforms really. It would all go through the publisher. In some respects, in some circumstances, that still is the case with certain publishing deals. But you would never. The platforms were quite scary to us back then. If Sony didn't like something, they the publisher would let you know that, and they were sort of cowering a little bit as well because they had enormous power, and so if you didn't meet milestones or you didn't toe the line in some way, shape, or form, then the deal would be yanked. You would have no deal, and you'd have to start all over again. So it was really, really tough. There was none of that, none of the freedom that we actually have now. So around, I guess for us, around 2005 is when we started to see a little bit of light at in the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, because we could see digital sort of looming on the horizon, and everyone was talking about it. It was in the press, and it was like, oh, this new ability to go directly to the customer. And I think one of our big problems when we started was that we didn't really understand, and I can only really speak for us or for me personally, it didn't really have that relationship because we were so removed from the customer. We didn't, or the consumer, the player, we didn't really understand their needs as directly or as importantly as the feedback wasn't coming back to us in the same sense as it does today. So we're always a bit removed because we had all these sort of layers in front of us before we'd even get to the consumer. Which is that's the whole aim of what we're doing. It's an entertainment business, and we serve people. That's what we're doing. And you could sort of, when you were working in the way that we used to work, you'd lose sight of that. It was all about meeting milestones, meeting design goals, meeting whatever it is that was set out in the agreement. That's what we had to sort of focus on. And so we didn't really have that sort of connection with people. And that's anyway. So that's it in a nutshell.
It's an interesting point because you're right. Back in those days, you would the people that you had to make happy were the publishers, and then the whatever platform you want to get it on. Whereas these days, and you see it talking to so many indie devs. Sorry, excuse my cough.
Right.
Where you have to basically do everything now. You have to do the marketing. You have to have your community liaison people that will talk to your communities and work out what's going on. So rather than rather than getting feedback from a couple of people high up who maybe will say yay or nay to your game, now you've got a game that you might have somewhere like Steam Early Access or just out in the world in general, and you've got all this feedback coming in from multiple different sources. Some of it is good and some of it not so good. But it's the way you get feedback for your games has changed very considerably.
It has, and it's healthy to get that feedback. It's scary. I won't kid you. It is actually quite frightening in some respects because, people can pile on. They can either love you or they can hate you, and
the internet's not the nicest place out there sometimes.
It can be horrible, but at the same time, it keeps you honest, and you really need to, you really do need to focus on making a product that people can be happy with, because I think we may have touched on this last time. Life is pretty tough. It's pretty hard. And, there's a lot of trouble and strife in the world. And when you go out and you work and you earn money and you have to pay bills and, all the things we all have to do, when we sit down and we watch a Netflix program or we listen to a piece of music or art or whatever, you want that piece of entertainment to be worthy of your time. It needs to be good. It can't just be ordinary. It could be a book, it could be anything, painting, whatever it is. It needs to be good. It needs to, meet your expectations. And I think that was one of the problems that we had. Again, we just didn't have that understanding of that real understanding of how people live their lives, what we were actually doing it for back
Mm.
then. But the internet, with all its marvels, has certainly changed all of that. And you get the feedback pretty quickly, and you've got to do a good job. So we can't, as a small studio, we're tiny, but we're trying to build a big game, and we can't really hide behind the indie excuse in inverted
Mm.
commas. It needs to be reasonable entertainment worthy of people's time. And that's what we're trying to do. I don't suggest for a second that we're going to meet all of the lofty goals that we have internally, but that's what we're attempting to do with the manpower and the size that we are currently.
Well, that sounds like a good segue into talking about Barton Lynch Pro Surfing, because it is coming out soon. November release date, I think I
Yes,
heard.
yeah, the
Yeah.
17th. That's right.
So that's just over a month away. So that's got to be very exciting for you there, and really, we're talking about the feedback that you're getting for games. The last time we spoke was in April 2022, and you'd just gone into early access on Steam.
Yes.
How has that experience shaped the game into what it is today for its launch?
It's been amazing, actually. The Steam users, I don't really like that term. The people who are in the Steam community, um, they are positive generally, but they also don't mess around. They tell you directly what it is they want, what it is they expect to see. They give you ideas, some good, some not so good, but they've definitely shaped the way and the direction that well, the path that we've walked, if you like. So they've actually told us, look, we don't like this, we like that. Have you thought about this? And so we've listened. That's what we're there to do. We're not just there to sort of pay lip service to people. We've actually listened and taken on their feedback and made the changes that they've wanted. We can't do everything, but we've certainly covered off on most of everything that people want. And it seems to the current approval that we've got, or the positive rating, is at 93%. So we must be doing something right. And as I say that, I've probably jinxed us. but right now as we speak, we're in reasonably good
But still, yeah,
standing with them.
for a game that's still in early access, and I know you're getting to the tail end of that, that's a really good rating. It means that people have been really liking what they're seeing, and I honestly can't wait to see it on the 17th of November as well. But one thing I'm always amazed about in games that feature a lot of water is the programming of the water. So, and you see games like Sea of Thieves that,
Mhm.
they're a particular sort of waves. They're there that interact with the boat a little bit, make it bob up and down. You might get a little bit stormy, get a little bit rougher, but the the customization you have, particularly in like I'm going to call them tutorial modes, but they're not quite tutorial modes, where you can
Yeah.
change the wave conditions and practice different tricks. That is incredible to me, and I just would like to get a little bit of insight how you went about creating those weather conditions.
That was a bit of a shock, to be honest with you. That's not something that, when we set down the brief initially to do that, we were coming off the back of the old game, so the surfer game that we did in 2017 on the PS3. We had weather conditions in that particular game, and for the most part, we had to fake it because of um, the capacity, the memory capacity of the PS3. We just couldn't shove it all in, so to speak, without trying to, without sounding too crude. But we just didn't have the processing power. Anyhow, this time around, the brief was, let's try and create real time weather conditions. It wasn't even real time, actually. It was just, let's see if we can create different weather conditions, more or less along the lines of what we did in the original game. But the the team that we had took me literally, and we ended up creating this beast, this technology that just it's still, as a surfer, it blows my mind. As a technologist, as someone who is a bit of a nerd and loves technology, that also blows my mind in that um, we can change the conditions of the tide. So the waves will break at a high tide, and they'll break at a slower rate, and they won't. The waves, the tubes themselves, that the waves themselves won't have a tube, so to speak. So it'll sort of be a top breaking wave, and then the mid tide it breaks. The waves break a bit faster, but then the tubes, the lip of the wave, comes from the top to the bottom, and then the same thing with the low tide where the waves are actually faster. Then we have a real time sort of a wind component, which then ruffles up the water, or if it's a heavy wind, and the directions are also taken into account, and then and or makes it smooth if it's a light wind. So if it's an onshore wind coming from the ocean toward the land, or if it's an offshore wind or a side shore wind, all of that is taken into account. We have the weather cycles, which is nothing new in games. You see a lot of that real time, morning, dusk, or midday dusk, that sort of thing, and then the clouds that sort of coincide with that as well, plus rain. But yeah, it's just the impact of seeing these waves changing in real time as you're sort of scrolling through the options, and the ocean changing in real time. That that is still by far and away my favorite thing out of the whole game for me personally. That's just because I just didn't expect that to happen. So it was pretty cool tech, and we're going to try and take that further, possibly into other games, or maybe if we're lucky enough to make a sequel to this one, we'll certainly try and expand upon it. But yeah, that's
It's
certainly something I love.
it's definitely 100% something that you should be doing. Like, you've created this amazing tool, and to use it on just one game, I think would be a disservice to the engine. Like, it's just the knowing how hard it is. Like, I'm not a developer myself, but I've read up on a lot of stuff about waves and just how shockingly hard they are to do. And this engine you've built is just amazingly complex in creating those weather patterns and the waves. And yeah, 100%, you should be proud of that creation right there. Um,
Thank you very much. The guys will be very pleased
yeah.
to hear that.
A little bit, well, it's still related to the game, but not quite related to the gameplay stuff. I am curious to know why Barton Lynch. Like, I must admit, I'm not a surfing
Yeah.
person, and so I don't
Sure.
really know the history. But coming from WA myself, I heard of people like Taj Burrow and Stephanie Gilmore, Mick Fanning, Lane Beachley, those sorts of people. So,
Yeah.
what made you choose Barton Lynch as the person to name your game after?
Um, there's a few reasons. One is that he's a world champ. Um, that he won his world championship a long time ago in 1988, but he won it in very dramatic circumstances. So he was not the favourite back in that time. He was actually running third that year, and he wasn't. He was sort of like a dark horse, I guess, up until the last event that was held at Pipeline. So he won at Pipeline, which is it's the Colosseum, if you will, of surfing, and he won it in very dramatic. Came from behind. Sort of a. There's a movie in there somewhere about the
Mm.
way he won,
Bit
and
of an
they
underdog
actually made a
story there, yeah.
yeah, it's an underdog story. The year before he was actually winning for the majority of the year, and then blew it at the last hurdle. So, but then the following year he wasn't really expected to win. There was Tom Carroll, who'd won two world titles at the time, and Damien Hardman, who was also a dual world champion. I'm not sure whether he'd won two by then, but anyway, Barton sort of came up from behind. They made a beer commercial out of it, a classic sort of a Tui's commercial back in the day. And anyway, so there was that. There was also the fact that he was a WSL commentator as well, a little bit like um, you know I'm not my wife is not a cricket fan, but she always commented about how uh, knowledgeable Shane Warne seemed to be, and she didn't know who he was. She just heard this guy's voice in the background talking about the cricket and the ins and outs of tactics and so on. And she was always impressed by, who is that guy? And I'd say it was Warney, and she'd say, oh wow, didn't expect that from him,
Mm.
because he was sort of the same sort of thing. Not that Barton has that Warney like reputation, but he's also a very, very articulate and eloquent uh, speaker, surf tactician. He's a coach as well. So when you listen to him doing, talking about surfing and talking about the strategic, positioning that the surfers have to implement when they're going into a heat, he gives you that insight. He makes you feel part of the whole experience. He gives the layperson a real insight into the way the strategies play out that may not be obvious or apparent to most of us sort of sitting there watching it all, but he gives you that. And so his commentary skills were or are second to none, and so much so that he was the Olympics commentator. So for the Tokyo Games, he was the guy, so there was that, and plus he's a surf coach. So for us, he sort of ticked all the boxes, and when we reached out to him, we're expecting, because we'd had a lot of rejections, a lot of people we'd approached, they sort of said, oh, well, you guys are nobodies from nowhere. So why would we work with you? And that was fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. But he gave us a little bit of time, and then, eventually we got him to come around, and ever since then he's been amazing. I mean, he's opened these doors that we never had access to, and he just, he's been amazing, really. So we're proud, we're happy to be working with him, and we hope to continue. We sort of see him as our Madden. That's the way we're trying to frame this, if you will. A lofty ambition maybe, but that's the way we sort of approach this.
Well, it does make sense, like, because once again, not being in the surfing world, I don't know a lot of them apart from the big names that you grew up hearing a little bit about, when they're down at Margaret River and stuff like that. But just the way he's transitioned his career as well to that coaching and the speaking side of things, that's, I think, a lot more important for what you're trying to do, because he's still in that world. He's got that experience, and like you say, he opens the doors for you to be able to do things like get the character skins for existing surfers into the game, and even, like, I'm guessing it probably opened a few doors to get to locations as well, because you mentioned the pipeline, which is in the game.
Yes.
And I've seen Margaret River's in there as well.
Yeah.
So how did you guys go about getting to those famous locations? Because it's an interesting one for me. Because you take photos of people, you want to use their likeness, you have to get their permission and get royalties for that. Do you have to go through the same sort of thing for locations as well?
No, that's the thing about the surf locations. If you're building a location that is, Billabong, Jeffreys Bay, a particular competition that is held in a particular way, then yes, absolutely. But if you're just, and it's not the same as an oval that's sort of run or owned by a council, a local council, or a ground, if you will. It's a little freer than that. You can create the location. Then I guess the challenge for us was to actually get a sponsor for the location for the event that we were creating, and so we went about it that way, and we wanted to make sure that, really insofar as the location creation was concerned, that we did an accurate job. And so we used some tools out of Houdini, one of the software programs we use on the art side, and that had this really neat little plug-in within Houdini called Mapbox. And so that enabled us to map these worlds within an inch of their lives, so to speak, and we're able to get the likeness and, what it felt like to actually walk, because we've got, the ability to walk, down the stairs at Margaret River to then paddle out. So it had to be very realistic and lifelike. It had to be accurate. So yeah, so that was a cool tool that we used. But yeah, no, to answer your question, we didn't have to get the permission. We did actually have to do a lot of backward and forward negotiating with the surf companies,
Hmm.
which Barton, he facilitated a lot of that. So he opened up the doors for those conversations, and we had those conversations, and we were lucky enough to have them, to sponsor the events in the game. So that's really how it all came to pass.
It's just absolutely amazing, and just getting the whole picture of your journey from the late '90s through to now, and just I'm so excited to see Barton Lynch Pro Surfing get its release 17th of November. You said
Yes,
yes,
that's right.
so very excited to see that coming out. If you haven't already, I'm guessing is early access still up, so you could get into it still right now.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
It's still available, and what we will be doing, just so people are aware, is that we aren't going to sort of set and forget. We're going to be supporting the title. We won't be we'll be adding small features, and if there are any bugs, we'll be fixing what it is that we need to
Mhm.
fix. So we won't be setting and forgetting on this. We'll be at it for for a long time,
It's
and we won't be and we'll be adding features that won't necessarily be DLC either. So we want to try and add a first person camera, for example. So we'll be adding that, and some other cool little things too.
It's amazing, some post game support there. Andrew, thank you again for jumping in with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Darren. Thanks for the opportunity. We appreciate it.